Alright, so Sixit says, hello, I'm really new in ZBrush and made this skull. I used Cinema for the main part and tried to add details in ZBrush. Maybe you can give me tips about adding details to make it look more realistic. So, the first thing I would say is that I think you didn't provide a reference for a skull. So what we'll do very quickly, we'll look up a quick image of a human skull. And there's, a lot of variation that we can expect to see in a skull. But what I would make sure that you do is that you are referencing a real skull, not somebody's sculpt, not a mold or casting, not like a casted skull. Make sure that you're looking at something real. Like this looks a little plasticky, I think it is. But yeah, try to find a real skull and use that as your reference. You have a lot of subdivision levels going on here, and I think just looking at this, there are a few things that I would recommend that you take a step back on. Mainly, the first thing that I noticed was, well, first of all, I think I would do a lower jaw to proportionally be able to measure this a little bit better. Actually, check this out. We're going to cheat. Lightbox, up in your Lightbox tool, there's this Ryan Kingsline anatomy model. He's got a really nice skull for this guy, or gal. We run an auto groups. Hey, now we got a 3D reference. Cool. Also, oh no, that's just very tiny. Okay. Let me increase the scale of this. And we're just going to move this off to the side. So the first thing that I noticed about your skull was the general shapes and forms that you have aren't incredibly accurate to what we would like to see. So I think you might be moving on to details a little bit too early. The first thing that I noticed was how the eye cavity shape here needs to be squared off a little bit more. Look for the major hits of the four corners of that and try to focus on that a little bit more. Also, the nose cavity that you've sculpted here isn't really accurate to what we would want to see for the nostril. I think you got a little bit too thick here with that center section, and it's just not accurate to what we would expect to see there in terms of the actual form. So I'd fill in some of that, and then after you do that, start to carve in and get a similar shape. In terms of the zygomatic flowing back here, I think it's all right, but I think there's probably a little bit more sharpening up that you could do here. You got kind of an awkward plane change happening here. So I would start to get, the roundness of the skull wrapped around there. And to mention, because I don't think I did mention why we're doing this, I've said this many times on stream, but no amount of high-resolution detail or information that you do on top of a sculpt is going to help it look good if the primary forms are not accurate or look good. So we really want to make sure that the basic shapes that we're creating are accurate and help make it look more like a skull. You mentioned that you wanted some textures to help make it look more realistic, but in actuality, the textures aren't really going to help it make it look more realistic if the major shapes and proportions are not there yet. So there's just some depth issues that you have going on here that you should probably reassess. Again, try to find some real human skull references. I'm using this as a very quick reference, but maybe you could use this as a reference as well. Make sure that you're getting some of the kind of squared offness of the zygomatic. Get that, I'll just use my move brush really quick, get kind of the divot of the plane change for the main bone there. Then as we wrap back, you're kind of getting a little thick here, so you could probably thin that out. And you don't really need a super large gap there. You might want to fill in some of that. It's just getting a little thick, and like I said, you got this kind of tight plane change here that we want to transition back on and play with. So look at those few things. Also, you forgot the hit of the skull back here, which isn't, you know, super hard to get in. I would use something like a pinch brush or something like that. I also think if you get the, like I mentioned, the lower jaw in there, that'll help you with proportions quite a bit as well. Also, the information for like the auditory meatus and ear canal and all the information that's going on here is just missing. If we look over here at this skull, this is your ear canal, your auditory meatus. And this is, you know, relatively pretty close to the basic form that I would like to see in something like this. So you're just kind of in general missing a lot of that back here, and just reassessing, take a step back and take care of some of that stuff. I think you'll be good. Any kind of excess negatives, I don't think these are going to help you out. So I would just get rid of those, move those in, and yeah, let's talk about texturing now. So I just very quickly used a move brush and closed those up. I'm also going to do the same thing here because I think you should do this as well to match the form that we would actually see in a skull. So you're very high resolution. You're at 8 million polys for this skull, and that's just simply unnecessary for what we have right now. So I was at 500,000 polys, and we're pretty much getting the exact same read. So I'm going to, you know, I'll dynamesh this at your, you know what, no I won't. I'm going to delete your highest res, subdiv, and I'm going to dynamesh this at 500-ish. So I'll do a quick dynamesh. Hopefully that doesn't take too long. Hopefully you don't have any extra things on here like HD Geo. I don't think you do. But yes, after you go back and reassess a lot of this stuff that we've quickly taken a look at and corrected, then I would recommend also check out that plane. That plane is not correct as that flows up. It needs to be a little bit more vertical. There's quite a few other things that are incorrect here anatomically, but I'm not going to spend the time to point them all out. I think just in general, reassess some of those basic forms and keep pushing on that. Cool, cool, cool. So in terms of texturing, you don't need the crazy resolution that you had in terms of getting that base layer. What I would recommend for basic noise, and I'm not sure if this is, so I can tell what alpha you've used here. So you've used the standard brush with drag rectangle, and you've grabbed like alpha 58 here, it looks like. And you've done a negative carve in, and you've done that with a very low setting. And maybe you didn't use this exact alpha, but there are a few that are very similar in ZBrush. And I would avoid using anything like this without hitting it with the second pass. So I had a video recently talking about texturing. What I would like you to do is try using the spray texture with one of these speckled alphas. So alpha 07, for instance. And what you can do with this is start to get just a little bit of a noise texture. And you can use this with the alt stroke or the positive stroke. But you can see, if I turn my Z intensity down a little bit, whoops, kind of start to get a little bit of a bony texture here. Starts to feel a little bit more like a skull. But emphasis on the point that if the overall major shape doesn't look like a skull, this isn't really going to help you too much. You can render this with a super amazing material and texture, and if it looks off, you know, people are going to notice. So in terms of general noise, that's what I would recommend hitting that with. In terms of the skull being broken into multiple segments, so there are some cracks and crevices in here. If you are going to use an alpha like the one that you used, that was, what did I say, alpha 58 or something, I don't know. This thing that is very obvious here, I would go back through and use something like a dam standard or something else to start emphasizing some of this form. If you're trying to put in like cracks in the head, in the skull, this feels very, very weird here. I'm emphasizing your strokes from your alpha that you use that I can see. So this feels, it doesn't really make much sense, even at this base level. But for some of the, like here, I don't know off the top of my head where these lines are. It doesn't really matter here. So I'll lower my lazy radius so so I can get a little bit of a better stroke. And I'll just kind of jitter that along. So same thing, same rule applies here with using an alpha as with using a base stroke. So you create the basic stroke first, and I'm only using enough geometry that is necessary. And then you can probably go back through, same thing with an alpha, right? And start adding some abnormality to it. However you want to do this, I'm just adding in a couple extra pock marks and strokes, whatever, just to give this a little bit more, you know, texture, just something quick. For the rest of this, you could probably come through with, you know, if you want to use like a mech cut brush, or if you want to use the damn standard a little bit more to like carve in and build up some of the form, you can probably tighten some of this a little bit. I'll just use this brush really quick, and sure, we'll just like fade out some of this, transition some of that, sure, and just start to work with your texture more and more and more. It's just like sculpting texture is no different than sculpting anything else. You start with the most basic shape, you start building up the secondary forms around it, making sure that your primary shape is not breaking down, and then you work a little bit more on some high resolution details after all that. So even like something like a clay tubes brush you could use here to get more of a bony kind of feeling. So just kind of building up some of this, and maybe a trim dynamic to get a little bit of that kind of pock-marked, kind of bony feeling around here. So see how this is starting to feel, sorry we're zooming in so close, starting to feel a bit more bony in this area, I think. Just play around with it, and you know, like I said, it's like sculpting anything else. I think that'll get you in a good direction.